Rich and the Sykes Island Geese. Kicking and screaming, Rich forced me to move from Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories back to BC. I'm not kidding. I didn't want to return to British Columbia. I loved the North. We arrived at Egmont in August of 1993, the same year we purchased the Black Duck. It was an excellent live-aboard boat, so that is what we did. The Duck was 33 feet long and 12 feet wide, with an extra long cabin. It had a complete cooking area, captain's bed over the engine, and a mate's bunk up forward with a toilet or head on the opposite side of the boat. There was a 3-foot square skylight right in the center of the cabin. You could tilt it upwards to allow the air in if you wanted. We were unsure of where we wanted to make our home, as Rich wanted to be near Pender Harbor, where we have many friends and family. So we decided to live aboard until we made up our minds whether to live in Egmont, Pender Harbor, Half Moon Bay, Sechelt, Roberts Creek, or Gibsons. We were contemplating somewhere along the coast, close to a government wharf, so that we'd have moorage for our boat. There is absolutely nothing in the world that compares to living aboard a boat during the summer. The air is always moving, so it's fresh. The skylight informs you of every change that is happening around you. There is always someone interesting close by to shoot the bull with. You can gaze at the sky and the stars without bright street lights to hamper your vision. When you go to bed at night, you can see the rippling, magical reflection of the ocean on the ceiling of the cabin. You feel that you are one with the sea as she gently rocks you to sleep. There is such a feeling of contentment and goodwill that it's like moving to a different country or universe. Rich was 71 years old when we bought the Black Duck. He couldn't wait to get back into the swing of living on the salt water again. He had salt water in his veins. When he stepped aboard the Black Duck, it was like putting on an undershirt. That's how close he and his ship became. You could feel the boat offering its deck to Rich, just as one would offer a hand in friendship. The boat welcomed him and me aboard. There was no strangeness, even after being absent from the sea for 20-odd years. Everything we learned at our parents' knees came back to us in all circumstances and situations. More than once in my life, I have stated out loud, thank goodness for parents that took the time to teach me so many worthwhile things. We had lived in Yellowknife, very close to the shores of the Great Slave Lake, which is so huge that you could take hold of Vancouver Island and fit it into the lake and still have room to spare. Rich and I would look upon the fresh water and sniff the air. It just didn't feel right to us because it didn't smell like salt water. The lake was large enough to resemble the Pacific Ocean, but it lacked the true smell of ocean water, salt. Instead of blood in our veins, we had pure salt water. Even though we went boating and fishing in the Great Slave Lake, we never became friendly with it. We always knew we were just visiting, waiting to get back to British Columbia and the Pacific Ocean, where the water would again smell right. Now, don't forget to take into consideration that the only reason we were back in BC waters after living in the Northwest Territories was that I had been injured and Richard had shanghaied me south for my own good, according to him. Plus, you must consider that I was 60 years old. Not exactly a spring chicken, if you know what I mean. I was very weak from months of convalescence. I was in no position to put up much of a defense, so I reluctantly took a 2-year leave of absence from my job and followed him to BC. I was unable to fulfill the requirements of my job. Thus, I was willing to allow him to live out his dreams. After all, how many husbands pack up their lives and put them on hold while they traipse from province to territory after a wife who has an itchy foot and wants to explore the topmost lands of Canada? I didn't even meet one husband of a teacher or a nurse up there, so I will have to surmise that not many husbands are that thoughtful or indulgent. In fact, 90% of them were separated or divorced. So, you see, I knew a good thing when I had it. My Poopsie was a real treasure. We'd been cruising around Egmont and the nearby inlets for about a month, just to get the feel of being back on the water. Rich decided we were going to go bushwhacking over at St. Vincent Bay. The first thing he started doing was picking salal and cedar boughs to sell to the local buyer. He, in turn, sold them to florists for decorating purposes. Rich always referred to salal gathering as bushwhacking. It made me think of cowboys and Indians, where the bad cowboys was always bushwhacking some poor Indian. Anyhow, we were picking salal at Sykes Island when it began blowing and raining like hell. The rain didn't bother us much, as we were both sporting our brand new Hallie Hansen rain gear, so we continued to pick. I had on a toque, and Rich had on his favorite baseball cap from the big river. Our feet were knee-high in rubber boots, and we both wore leather gloves. By evening time, we had about 10 huge bales of salal, which we couldn't transport to the Black Duck because it was too rough to get the rowboat close enough to the shore without puncturing a hole in his hull. So we left our haul in the bushes out of sight. We'd collect them when the weather settled down. Rich knew of a good anchorage on the inner shore of Sykes Island, facing the mainland. It was a longish sort of bay, not very wide. The Black Duck would fit into it after some careful maneuvering. It was blowing hard, at least 20 knots from the southeast, and breaking even on the inside waters. Fortunately, both of us were capable of operating the boat. Rich eased into the bay, bow first. When we were nearly in, as far as we could go, he kicked the motor into high gear and turned the wheel as far as she would go, swinging the boat around so that the bow was facing outwards into the wind. He said, "Take over, Mummy," and hurried up to the bow to throw out the anchor. He threw the anchor, and I reversed the motor so that the anchor would snug in and get a good hold on the bottom. The anchor grabbed, and the wind began shoving the boat sideways very rapidly. Rich yelled, "Watch it, Mummy! I'm going to put a shoreline on this side of the boat." He gathered up a coil of rope that he kept for emergencies and struggled into the rowboat, while the wind and waves did their level best to pull him into the waiting white water. It was nerve-wracking to watch him fighting to keep the boat in position while he got into it. Our little ship and his stiff old bones, which did not bend easily, would send him sprawling into the waiting sea. Finally, He made it, and like he always did, he stood up in the bow of the boat and used an oar to paddle towards the shore. He really had to fight with the strong southeast wind. He made it ashore and had a horrible time landing the boat. He pulled it right out of the water to keep it from being damaged from the continual banging of the surge. He was a 71-year-old rascal, but he was a darn smart and tough rascal, and he was in his element. He flipped the rowboat around like it was some small toy, and he was a giant pussycat. He really felt alive in that sort of circumstance. He tied his rope around a tree, feeding out the coil as he staggered back to the boat, slipped and sliding on the wet seaweed. He grabbed the rowboat, which was a 14-foot tin boat, not exactly light, and launched her again. He managed to get back into the skiff. Then he rowed back out to the Black Duck. He tightened the shoreline, swore like a logger, and said, "I'm going to have to put another line on the other side of the boat because it's still swinging too far, and we'll end up hitting the shore." I nodded my head in the affirmative to let him know that I understood. He turned the boat around and began paddling toward the opposite shoreline. Again he was up in the bow and paddling like mad to make headway. I was in the wheelhouse of the Black Duck, staying close to the controls and the steering wheel like any good first mate does. I took my eyes off him for a second, and the next thing you know, I heard the most soul-frightening sound. Rich bellowed as he fell forward into the sea. He hit the water shoulder first and plowed under, sending spray flying in all directions. By the time I got my eyes back onto the area he was at, he came up out of the water like a huge walrus, got his right arm into the rowboat and bellowed, "Whoosh!" so loud that he knocked every crow off the tree limbs where they were perched to wait out the storm. I was out of the cabin so quickly that it's amazing I didn't get some sort of speed burn. By the time I got to the side of the boat, I had stripped down to just my jeans and T-shirt. I had my foot on the gunwale, mounting it in order to dive in and to go to my poopsie's rescue. But before I could dive, he yelled, "Stay there, Mummy! I'm okay." So with one arm holding the rowboat, he used the other to swim towards the shore. He was making lots of noise, and he had the water flying in all directions as his left arm moved him and the boat toward the beach. Now, the unexpected part of this tale is coming. Up in the shore in our little bay was a small tree with a lovely mossy bank around it. There were about 5 or 6 full-grown Canada geese congregating under the tree. When they heard Rich making his big whooshing sound and saw all the water he was spraying around, they got really excited. The next thing you know, they were flapping their wings and heading for the water as fast as they could move. They were half running and half flying in their hurry to join him. The air was rife with their goose language, which sounded totally happy to my ear. I can only imagine that they thought he was some sort of goose. They sped right over to where he was struggling towards the shore. They began bathing, preening and flapping their wings in the ritual that birds do when they are enjoying the water. And they made their goose talk louder than I'd ever heard it before. They literally came right up to Rich and started bathing and having fun alongside him, their wings brushing against him in fellowship. He didn't even give them a second glance. Single-mindedly, he continued towards the shore. He managed to pull the rowboat up, empty out the water, get back into it, and make his way back to the Black Duck, where I was waiting and wondering what manner of man I had married. The excitement over, The geese swam sedately up beside the black duck, and then back to their mossy bank to contemplate the day they swam and bathed with the biggest goose they had ever seen. Rich stripped off his rain gear and his clothing. His boots were filled with water, and each one must have weighed 20-odd pounds. I handed him a towel, and he rubbed life back into his flesh. After he donned a dry set of clothes, I said, "That's all the bushwhacking or traveling we're doing today. We're not moving until the wind calms down." For my part, I was relieved to learn that the only thing we'd lost was Rich's baseball cap. I scanned the bay, but it never surfaced. Probably one of those geese had it tucked under their wing, and he would wear it with pride after we left the scene, sending a silent thank you to the Creator. I figured we got off lucky. The end.